In the spring of 1865, a young Union soldier stood trembling before a military tribunal. For 4 long years, this soldier had marched through mud and blood, had witnessed the horrors of First Bull Run, had nursed the wounded and buried the dead, had carried secret messages through enemy lines and had never, not once, been discovered. But now the truth was about to come out. Because this soldier, this battle-hardened veteran who had fooled everyone, generals, fellow soldiers, Confederate officers, and countless others, was a woman. Her name was Sarah Emma Edmonds, and her story is one of the most extraordinary tales of courage, deception, and patriotism in American history. This is the story of a young woman who loved her adopted country so deeply that she disguised herself as a man, enlisted in the Union Army, and served with distinction for nearly the entire war. She worked as a soldier, a nurse, a mail carrier, and most remarkably, as a spy behind Confederate lines. And here is what makes it even more incredible. She did not just disguise herself once. She disguised herself multiple times as different people, including, on at least one occasion, as a young black man. How did she do it? Why did she do it? And how did she manage to fool everyone for 4 long years? Well, friends, settle in, because this story has more twists and turns than a mountain road. A childhood in Canada. To truly understand Sarah Emma Edmonds, we need to travel back not to America but to a small farm in New Brunswick, Canada. It was there in December of 1841 that Sarah was born. She was the fifth child in a family with a harsh, demanding father. Isaac Edmonds wanted a son to help work the farm and carry on the family name. Instead, he got a daughter, and he never let Sarah forget his disappointment. From her earliest years, Sarah was different. She was not interested in the domestic arts that young women of her era were expected to master. No, Sarah wanted to ride horses, she wanted to explore the woods, she wanted adventure, and when she was a teenager, she discovered a book that would change her life forever. It was called Fanny Campbell, the Female Pirate Captain. It was a novel about a young woman who disguises herself as a man and goes to sea to rescue her lover from pirates. Now to us today it might sound like a simple adventure tale, but to young Sarah it was a revelation. Women could do that, women could put on men's clothing and live freely in the world. That idea planted a seed in Sarah's mind, and it would soon grow into something remarkable. You see, when Sarah was still a teenager, her father arranged for her to marry a man she did not love. He was an older farmer who she found repulsive. In that era, women had few options. Marriage was often not a choice but an obligation, but Sarah chose differently. Sometime around 1857, historians are not certain of the exact date, Sarah Emma Edmonds cut her hair short, put on men's clothing, and vanished. She reinvented herself as Franklin Flint Thompson, a young man seeking his fortune in America. Think about that for a moment. A young woman alone crossing into a foreign country, taking on a completely new identity. The courage that must have required is almost unimaginable. Franklin Thompson, as we will call her now, eventually settled in Flint, Michigan. That is right, she took her new last name from the city where she started her new life. She found work as a Bible salesman, traveling throughout Michigan and into the territories. And by all accounts, she was good at it, charming, persuasive, well-liked. For nearly 4 years, Franklin Thompson lived as a man, made friends, built a reputation, and no one suspected a thing. And then in April of 1861, everything changed. Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. The Civil War had begun. Enlisting in the Union Army. All across the North, young men rushed to enlist. Patriotic fever swept through cities and towns. And Franklin Thompson felt that fever too. Now we might ask ourselves, why would she enlist? She was already living successfully as a man. She had a good job. She was safe. Why risk everything by joining the army, where the chances of discovery would be so much greater? Sarah herself answered that question in her memoirs published after the war. She wrote, and I quote, "I could only thank God that I was free and could go forward and work, and I was not obliged to stay at home and weep." You see, Sarah had come to love her adopted country. America had given her freedom, freedom from her father, freedom from a forced marriage, freedom to become whoever she wanted to be, and now that country was in danger. On May 25, 1861, Franklin Thompson enlisted in Company F of the 2nd Michigan Infantry. The regimental doctor performed a physical examination, as was standard, but in those days such examinations were rather cursory. Clothing was not fully removed, and Franklin Thompson passed without incident. Private Thompson was officially a soldier in the Union Army. Now you might wonder how a woman could hide her identity in the close quarters of Army life. Soldiers slept together, bathed together, shared every aspect of daily existence. How could she possibly keep her secret? Well, friends, Sarah was clever, extraordinarily clever. She volunteered for duty as a mail carrier, a job that kept her moving away from camp for long stretches. She offered to take night watches when others wanted to sleep. When nature called, she found excuses to seek privacy. And remember, soldiers in that era did not bathe nearly as often as we do today. Weeks might pass without anyone removing their clothes completely. She also had some physical advantages. She was tall for a woman, around 5 feet 6 inches, and had always been athletic. Her voice was naturally low, and she had spent years practicing how to walk, talk, and carry herself as a man. Still, it was an incredible risk every single day. The 2nd Michigan saw their first real action at the First Battle of Bull Run in July of 1861. It was a disaster for the Union, a chaotic retreat that shattered Northern illusions of a quick victory. Franklin Thompson was there, in the smoke and thunder of battle, watching men die, somehow keeping her secret. After Bull Run, she was assigned to work as a field nurse, tending to the wounded and dying. It was gruesome, heartbreaking work, and yet she excelled at it. Her fellow soldiers noted that young Franklin had an unusually gentle touch, a natural tenderness with the wounded, if only they had known why. Becoming a spy. Sometime in late 1861, Franklin Thompson's life took another dramatic turn. Union commanders were desperate for intelligence about Confederate positions, troop strengths, and fortifications. They needed spies willing to cross enemy lines. The work was incredibly dangerous. If caught, a spy could be executed, and somehow Franklin Thompson volunteered. Now, what happened next is drawn from Sarah's own memoirs published in 1865. Historians have debated some of the details over the years, but the core of her story is remarkable. For her first mission behind enemy lines, Sarah did not just maintain her disguise as Franklin Thompson. She created an entirely new disguise. She would go as Cuff, a young black man. Think about what this meant. In 1861 and 62, before the Emancipation Proclamation, enslaved people moved throughout the Confederacy in ways that white men could not. A young black man carrying supplies or performing labor would be nearly invisible to Confederate soldiers. Sarah obtained silver nitrate and used it to darken her skin. She acquired a wig of short black hair. She dressed in the rough clothing of a field laborer. And she walked straight into the Confederate lines around Yorktown, Virginia. Can you imagine the courage that required? If her Union disguise was discovered, she would face exposure and humiliation. But if her Confederate disguise failed, she could be shot as a spy. And yet she went anyway. For several days, Cuff worked within the Confederate fortifications, carrying water to soldiers, helping to build earthworks. And all the while she was counting cannons, noting troop positions, memorizing everything she saw. At one point, she was actually handed a rifle and ordered to help defend a position. A Confederate officer put a weapon in the hands of a Union spy and never suspected a thing. When she finally slipped back across the lines to Union territory, she carried intelligence that proved valuable to General George McClellan's Peninsula Campaign. That name is pronounced McClellan for those wondering. And that was just her first mission. Over the following months, Sarah undertook multiple spy missions behind Confederate lines. She did not always disguise herself as a black man. Sometimes she went as an Irish peddler woman named Bridget O'Shea, sometimes as a young Confederate soldier who had lost his unit. Each disguise required new skills, new accents, new ways of carrying herself. She was in effect an actress performing on the most dangerous stage imaginable. During one mission, she was recognized by a Confederate soldier, a man who had actually deserted from the Union Army and joined the Southern cause. He knew Franklin Thompson, and now here was Franklin Thompson dressed as a civilian wandering through Confederate territory. Sarah's heart must have nearly stopped, but she kept her composure, denied everything, affected a different accent, and somehow talked her way out of it. The deserter was not convinced. But before he could raise the alarm, Sarah slipped away into the night, making her way back to Union lines with vital intelligence about Confederate movements. The crisis and desertion. For 2 years, Sarah Emma Edmonds as Franklin Thompson served with courage and distinction. She participated in multiple battles. She nursed countless wounded soldiers, she carried mail and messages, and she spied behind enemy lines. But by the spring of 1863, her luck was running out. Sarah had contracted malaria. Now in the Civil War, disease killed far more soldiers than bullets. Malaria, typhoid, dysentery, these were the invisible enemies that devastated both armies. And malaria, once contracted, brought recurring fevers that could incapacitate a person for days or weeks. For Sarah, this was a disaster. A soldier with malaria would be sent to an army hospital, would be examined by doctors, would be treated and very likely discovered. She faced an impossible choice. She could report to the hospital, risk exposure, and face the consequences. Court-martial, humiliation, possibly worse, or she could disappear. On April 19, 1863, Private Franklin Thompson of the 2nd Michigan Infantry deserted. He simply walked away from camp and never returned. Now we need to understand what this meant. Desertion was a serious crime. Franklin Thompson's name was added to the official list of deserters, a mark of shame and dishonor. If he was ever found, he could be shot. But Sarah had no choice. She was burning with fever. Her secret was on the verge of discovery, and so she vanished. She made her way to a private hospital in Ohio, where she recovered under her original identity as Sarah Edmonds, a woman. Think about that for a moment. For 4 years, she had been Franklin, had built a life, friendships, a military record. And now Franklin was gone. He had to be, it must have felt like a kind of death. But Sarah Emma Edmonds was not finished serving her country. After recovering from malaria, she worked as a nurse for the United States Christian Commission, this time openly as a woman. She served in hospitals caring for wounded soldiers until the war finally ended in April of 1865. She had served her nation in two different identities and survived. After the war. After the war, Sarah did something that took tremendous courage. She wrote a book. In 1865, she published Nurse and Spy in the Union Army, a memoir recounting her extraordinary experiences. She changed some names and details, but the essential story was there: the disguises, the spy missions, the battles. The book was a sensation. It sold over 175,000 copies, an enormous number for that era. And Sarah donated her profits to veterans' relief organizations. But there was still unfinished business. You see, Franklin Thompson was still officially listed as a deserter, and that fact haunted Sarah. Her comrades, the men she had served alongside who had never known her secret, believed that Franklin Thompson had abandoned them, had proven himself a coward. Sarah could not live with that. In 1882, she petitioned the War Department to clear Franklin Thompson's name. She revealed her true identity, she provided evidence of her service, and she asked for justice. Her former comrades were astonished. Franklin was a woman. The young soldier they had known, who had been so brave under fire, was Sarah Edmonds. But after the initial shock, they rallied to her side. One by one, veterans of the 2nd Michigan wrote letters supporting her petition. They testified to Franklin Thompson's courage and dedication. And in July of 1884, Congress acted. The charge of desertion was officially removed from Franklin Thompson's record. Sarah Emma Edmonds was granted an honorable discharge, and she was awarded a government pension of $12 per month for her military service. She was, quite possibly, the only woman to receive a full veteran's pension for Civil War service while living. In 1897, at the age of 55, Sarah Emma Edmonds did something even more remarkable. She applied for and was granted membership in the Grand Army of the Republic, the Organization of Union Veterans. She was the only woman ever admitted. When she attended reunions with her former comrades, she wore a badge that read SEE Seelye. She had married a man named Linus Seelye after the war, but everyone knew who she really was: Franklin Thompson, the soldier, the spy. The woman who had fooled them all. Legacy and reflection. Sarah Emma Edmonds Seelye passed away on September 5, 1908 in La Porte, Texas. She was 66 years old. She was buried with full military honors in Washington Cemetery in Houston, a veteran honored at last. Her story raises questions that still resonate today. Why did she do it? Was it purely patriotism? Was it the thrill of adventure? Was it a continuation of her flight from a life she never wanted? Perhaps it was all of these things. In her own words, Sarah wrote, "I am naturally fond of adventure, a little ambitious, and a good deal romantic, but patriotism was the true secret of my success." What we know for certain is this: Sarah Emma Edmonds loved her country. She was willing to risk everything: her safety, her identity, her very life, to serve a cause she believed in. And she did so at a time when women were told they had no place on the battlefield. Historians estimate that at least 400 women disguised themselves as men and served in the Civil War on both sides. Most were never discovered. Most of their names are lost to history, but Sarah's name we remember. In 2004, the Sarah Emma Edmonds Camp was founded as a women's auxiliary of the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War, honoring her memory. Her story has been told in books, documentaries, and articles. She has become a symbol of courage and determination, proof that the desire to serve one's country knows no gender. And perhaps that is her greatest legacy. Not just what she did, but what her story tells us about the human spirit. When we believe in something strongly enough, we can become someone we never imagined. Friends, I want to leave you with one final image. Picture a regimental reunion sometime in the late 1880s. Old men now, these veterans of the 2nd Michigan, gathering to remember their youth, their lost comrades, their shared sacrifice, and among them a quiet woman with knowing eyes. She had marched with them, bled with them, mourned with them. They called her Frank. Old habits die hard. And when they raised their glasses to fallen friends, she raised hers too, because she was one of them. Always had been. Sarah Emma Edmonds fooled everyone for 4 years, but in the end the only thing that mattered was that she had served. She had answered her country's call, she had done her duty, and that is a legacy that will never fade. Thank you so much for joining me today, friends. If this story moved you, I hope you will share it with someone who loves history as much as we do. And please leave a comment below. Tell me, what Civil War story should we explore next? I read every single comment, and your suggestions inspire future videos. Until next time, keep their memory alive.